The Mustang was in all probability the greatest fighter of World War II. It was one of the few classic fighters created after the start of the war and used in large numbers. The Merlin-engined Mustang was a truly magnificent fighter and fighter-bomber. The war itself resulted from the dreams of Adolf Hitler to make Nazi Germany the dominant military, political, and economic force in the Western Hemisphere. At the same time, conquests to the east would give Germany the Lebensraum, or living space, that Hitler felt that its growing population both needed and deserved. The first real military expression of this program was the conquest of Poland, which started on the 1st of September 1939 and triggered British and French declarations of war on Germany. From the 10th of May 1940, there came the German conquests of the Low Countries and France. These campaigns saw the first use of the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war concept, in which armored force swept forward to break through the front and encircle major forces for destruction by the slower-moving infantry and artillery. The armored forces were given fire support by specially trained Luftwaffe ground attack units, flying aircraft such as the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka. The French armies and air force were supported by British ground forces and the Royal Air Force. But the Germans were technically and tactically superior on the ground and in the air. German fighters rapidly gained air superiority, which allowed their bombers and ground attack aircraft to go about their tasks against minimal opposition. By the end of May, the Germans had taken northeastern France, and the British evacuated their own, as well as some French forces from Dunkirk. Under heavy air attack, soldiers assembled on the beaches and awaited transport back to England. The Germans then resumed their attack to the south, and by the end of June, France had been beaten. This left only the UK to fight on alone against Germany. Hitler hoped that the British would reach an accommodation, but meanwhile prepared for an invasion. Given the British naval superiority, such an invasion would be wholly dependent on German air superiority. The German effort to secure this advantage was the world's first strategic air campaign, the Battle of Britain. The new British Prime Minister Winston Churchill became a national inspiration.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender.
Kenley, Biggin Hill, Hornchurch, North Weald, Debden. Will you warn your controller that this looks like yet another attack on airfields?
The RAF's fighter command had only modest strength, but enjoyed the advantage of fighting in the skies over its own country with the aid of a highly effective control system based on chains of early warning radars. This allowed the command's two classic fighters, the Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire, to be scrambled in the right strengths and in just the right places to intercept the oncoming armadas of German bombers and their supporting fighters. Great air battles took place over the south of England, with the British generally gaining the edge. Even so, it was a close-run battle, and the British were fortunate to be fighting over home territory with ready access to new fighters straight off the production line, and damaged fighters that had been quickly repaired and rushed back into service. By early October, their bomber losses were so severe that the Germans switched to night bombing in the so-called Blitz, and the Battle of Britain was effectively over. It was a clear British victory. What had been clear from before the start of the war, however, was that the UK could not manufacture all the aircraft it required. So a purchasing commission was sent to the USA to place orders for many types of military hardware, including warplanes with U.S. companies. More fighters were an urgent priority, and the British choice initially fell on the Curtiss P-40, which was currently in production to meet U.S. needs. This was a worthy but in no way exceptional fighter, and as Curtiss was already close to maximum production, the British asked North American Aviation to undertake licensed production to meet British needs. North American's president, Dutch Kindleberger, knew his company could quickly design and build a new fighter tailored to British needs. A contract for the NA-73 design was signed in March 1940 and specified the delivery of the first production aircraft in January 1941. The prototype first flew on the 26th of October 1940 and was clearly a winner, even though it had the same Allison V1710 engine that powered the P-40. It performed best at medium and lower altitudes. Thus, the British at first used the Mustang as a low-altitude reconnaissance fighter. The best British fighter engine of the time was the Rolls-Royce Merlin of the same V12 layout as the Allison engine, and soon to enter U.S. production as the V1650. Rolls-Royce suggested a Merlin-engined Mustang, and prototype conversions revealed superb performance, right up to high altitude. The U.S. Army Air Forces had already trialed the Mustang as the P51. From the P51B for the Americans, as well as the Mustang Mark III for the British, all Mustang fighters had the V1650 Merlin engine, with a 4-blade propeller in place of the 3-blade unit of the Allison-engined aircraft. With this engine, the Mustang displayed superb outright performance. The maximum speed of the Allison-engined P51A was 390 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. In the P51B, this rose to 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. The climb rate was also considerably better, and the service ceiling was increased from slightly more than 31,000 feet to a very impressive 42,000 feet. Another improvement was in range on internal fuel, which could also be increased by the addition of a drop tank under each wing. The Mustang also revealed very good flying characteristics and excellent agility. After combinations of 30 and 50 caliber machine guns in the wing and fuselage of the early models were tried, the gun armament was standardized as 4 wing-mounted 50 caliber weapons with 1,260 rounds of ammunition. There was also provision for 2 bombs of up to 1,000 pound weight under the wing as an alternative to drop tanks. Napalm tanks were yet another underwing option, further enhancing the Mustang's capability as a tactical fighter. Known to the British as the Mustang Mark III, the P51B was in full production by 1943 and entered service with the 8th Air Force in December of that year. The first pure Mustang model to enter U.S. Army Air Force service in March 1943 had been the Allison-engined P51A. This had been preceded by the A-36A Invader, also with the Allison engine, which had been delivered from September 1942 as a dedicated ground attack warplane with dive bombing capability, 6 50 caliber wing guns, provision for 2 500-pound bombs, and dive brakes under the wing. These last were later deemed superfluous and wired shut. Just 500 A-36 Invaders were built, which had all been delivered by March 1943, and it was the first model to see combat in U.S. colors during 1943, when the type served with two groups that saw service in the Mediterranean theater. Here, they proved useful in the Sicilian campaign and early stages of the Italian campaign from July of that year. Operations in the Mediterranean theater also provided telling proof that the basic airframe of the A-36 and P-51 was strong. The aircraft were therefore able to undertake maneuvers under stress in the thick and turbulent air of lower altitudes without risk of structural failure. The aircraft were also rugged, and this translated into the ability to operate safely and effectively on extemporized airfields close behind the front line. Maintenance crews discovered that the aircraft were straightforward to maintain, to repair, and also to rearm and refuel. This was especially important in aircraft intended to deliver timely quick reaction support to the hard-pressed ground forces. The Mustang had been designed with a wing of laminar flow section and an engine boosted by a supercharger in a large duct under the rear fuselage. The wing section reduced drag, and as well as boosting the engine, the supercharger exhausted hot gases in a manner which added a measure of thrust. These factors, combined with a large quantity of fuel which could be carried, resulted in significantly greater ranges than those of the USAAF's current escorts, the twin-engined Lockheed P-38 Lightning and massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The first Mustang aircraft had possessed an internal fuel capacity of 184 U.S. gallons, but partway through the P-51B production run, this was increased to 269 U.S. gallons by the addition of a tank in the rear fuselage. This made the P-51B and later variants with the same tankage somewhat tail-heavy at takeoff, so the fuel in this tank was used first. This internal tankage gave the P-51C a range of 1,300 miles at an altitude of 10,000 feet. But the Mustang could also lift two 75 or 150 U.S. gallon drop tanks, and with maximum internal and external fuel, the range of the P-51C was 2,440 miles. This prodigious figure made it possible for the P-51C to escort the 8th Air Force's heavy bombers deep into Germany in their daylight bombing missions. Moreover, once it had jettisoned its drop tanks, the P-51C had the performance, firepower, and agility to tangle effectively with the defending German fighters. These were mainly the Messerschmitt Bf-109G and Focke-Wulf FW-190A, and later the FW-190C. With combat over, the P-51C still had ample internal fuel to return home. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and consolidated B-24 Liberator four-engined heavy bombers of the 8th and 15th Air Forces, which flew from England and Italy respectively, were the heart of the American air effort to destroy Germany's war-making industries by the destruction of key manufacturing capabilities. The bombers were well defended by 50 caliber machine guns in powered nose, dorsal, ventral, and tail turrets, as well as manually controlled guns in the waist and other positions. But they were still threatened by enemy fighters equipped with cannon possessing greater range and destructive power than the bombers' defensive machine guns. For this reason, the bombers cruised in a long stream of box formations that were staggered vertically and laterally. These boxes had been carefully planned so that each bomber was covered by the fire of neighboring aircraft. This meant that an attacking fighter was subjected to the fire of more than the single bomber it was attacking. The other major threat that the bombers faced was that of German anti-aircraft guns, or flak. For this reason, the bomber streams flew into Germany along courses carefully planned to avoid major flak concentrations. This series of dogleg flight segments meant longer missions, and while the bombers possessed the required range capability, the P-38 and P-47 escort fighters did not. The fighters had therefore to operate in a series of relays, in which one group, accompanying the bombers, was replaced by another, which had been directed across the angle of the dogleg to reach its charges with a useful quantity of fuel still remaining. Even so, the situation did not allow the P-38 and P-47 to support the bombers right through missions to strike targets deep in Germany and German-occupied Central Europe. Another factor which had to be taken into consideration was that neither the P-38 nor the P-47 was a first-class air combat fighter. As a twin-engined warplane, the former lacked the agility of the German fighters, and with its great size and weight, the latter was also at a disadvantage against German fighters. This all started to change with the advent of the P-51B and generally similar P-51C with their V1650 engines, and reached its definitive position with the P-51D. This was a simple development with a number of small but important improvements, and most importantly a new canopy and heavier gun armament. The original canopy had been a framed unit, designed to slide to the rear over transparencies in the side of the fighter's raised rear fuselage decking. The limitations imposed of the pilot's fields of vision had been one of the few criticisms of the early variants, even when the canopy was replaced with the British Malcolm hood with no framing and bulged sides. In the P-51D, the rear fuselage was cut down, and over it a superbly streamlined single-piece and therefore frameless or bubble canopy was fitted. This reduced drag and also offered the pilot excellent fields of vision. The gun armament was also boosted to 650 caliber machine guns with 1,880 rounds of ammunition. So successful was the P-51D that it was built in larger numbers than any other model. No fewer than 7,956 such aircraft, coming off 2 production lines for service against Germany in the European theater and against Japan in the Pacific theater. With the P-51D, the 8th Air Force could provide escort for its bombers all the way to and from all but the most distant targets. In January 1943, at the Inter-Allied Conference in Casablanca, attended by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill, together with their senior political supporters and military leaders, the Allies demanded Germany's unconditional surrender. 6 months later, there emerged in the point-blank directive a list of German industrial targets that were to be attacked and destroyed by U.S. and British bombers working in tandem. The first strategic target fixed by the Casablanca Conference was the invasion of Sicily, and subsequent operations against the mainland of Italy as soon as possible after the defeat of the last Axis forces in North Africa. The German and Italian forces in Tunisia surrendered in May 1943, and the invasion of Sicily followed in July. The undertaking involved the use of substantial airborne forces. But the main task was allocated to the U.S. 7th and British 8th Armies, which landed in the south of the island on the 10th of July. under cover of powerful tactical air forces, including the A-36A as one of their most effective ground attack warplanes, the Allies fought to get off the beachheads. Then the American ground forces moved forward to the northwest in western Sicily. At the same time, the British moved north in the east of the island. The fighting was difficult and made harder by the climate, terrain, and tenacious defense put up by the German formations. After reaching the island's north coast at Palermo on the 22nd of July, the U.S. forces swung east toward the narrow Strait of Messina, separating Sicily from the Italian mainland, which was also the target of the British. Despite Allied air superiority, the Germans and Italians managed to evacuate much of their strength before the U.S. 3rd Division took Messina on the 17th of August. After a largely diversionary British landing on the toe of the Italian boot on the 3rd of September, the main Allied assault on Italy started on the 9th of September, when the Fifth Army, with British and American components, landed at Salerno, just to the south of Naples. In the land campaign which followed, the Allies drove slowly northward through Italy against a sterling German defense that made excellent use of the rugged mountain terrain. It was slow, bitter fighting in which the weather and terrain were often as significant as the German defenses. Overhead, the Allied air forces played an increasingly important role. Escorted by Mustang fighters, the heavy and medium bombers struck at targets of strategic importance, such as industries and transport complexes. With Italy effectively out of the way after the Salerno landings, the numerically inferior German air forces were swiftly whittled away, and the bombers could soon go about their work with only minimal escort. This freed the Mustangs to play an increasingly important tactical role, with ground attack sorties to strafe and bomb targets of opportunity. In the often mountainous terrain of central Italy, ground attack work at low level demanded high levels of concentration to fly safely low over very hostile terrain, and in which there could be a flak concentration behind any ridge. U.S. bombers also struck on several occasions at the oil installations of Ploiești in Romania, which were Germany's primary source of the fuel with which it could not sustain its war effort. The installations were first attacked from North Africa, but later the bomber groups in England and Italy became involved once agreement had been reached with the Soviets for so-called shuttle operations. Here the bombers and their escorting Mustangs continued northeast from Ploiești to land at 3 bases in Ukraine for the crews to rest as their aircraft were repaired, refueled, and rearmed. On the return flight, the bombers attacked Ploiești or other targets. Though the bombers damaged elements of the oil installations, they never succeeded in delivering a knockout blow, and on occasion suffered heavy losses. By the beginning of 1944, the Allies were well on the way to planning Operation Overlord as their primary strategic invasion of northern France was designated. Overall command was vested in a U.S. officer, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, with 4 British officers as his primary subordinates. The Deputy Commander-in-Chief was Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder, the Land Force Commander, General Sir Bernard Montgomery, the Naval Force Commander, Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, and the Air Force Commander, Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh Mallory. Even as the invasion plan was being drafted and then finalized, huge numbers of men and vast quantities of weapons and other material were being built up at camps in the UK. These stretched round the southeast, south, and southwest coasts of England, within easy reach of the ports from which the invasion fleet would sail. Meanwhile, the bombers and their Mustang escorts had been pulled off their strategic tasks for use against German targets round the coast of northwest Europe and the areas behind them. Here, German fortifications were bombed, radar sites attacked, dumps shattered, and many of the transport and communication links were severed. The object was clearly to degrade the German ability to respond to an invasion, both directly and by bringing up reinforcements. Great care was taken, though, not to give away the fact that the invasion was to be directed at Normandy. Thus, coastal and inland targets were attacked round much of the periphery of German-held northwest Europe. By this stage of the war, German air power in France and the Low Countries had been so hard hit that it could offer only minimal opposition. Thus, the bombers required only modest escort, and this freed large numbers of Mustangs to join the Allies' other fighters in the tactical role as fighter bombers. Wearing the black and white bands marking aircraft involved in the invasion, the Mustangs thus complemented types such as the Bristol Beaufighter twin-engined heavy fighter bomber and Northrop P51 Black Widow twin-engined night fighter and intruder in attacks on targets of opportunity. Flying low and fast, the Mustangs searched out and tackled a host of target types, ranging from parked aircraft to trains, via rail tunnels, canal and river installations, and artillery, including flak sites. On D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, the Allies landed on the coast of Normandy and started to move inland. They were faced by determined German army opposition, but under an umbrella of Mustangs and other fighters, had nothing to fear from the remnants of the German Air Force in France. On the 13th of June, the Germans launched the first V-1 buzz bomb missile at London, and the task of defeating this novel weapon fell to bands of British anti-aircraft guns and Allied fighters. The two most important fighters in the early stage of the fight against the V-1 were the Spitfire and Mustang, as these had the speed to overhaul the missile at the typical altitude of about 4,500 feet. As the Allies seized a larger lodgment in Normandy, the first fighter squadrons moved onto the continent. The Allied armies moved forward after their breakout from the lodgment toward the end of July, the Mustangs and other fighters keeping pace with them to maintain a protective shield over the ground forces. The Mustangs roamed ahead of the armies as they swept forward. Initially, their job was to destroy or drive away any remaining Luftwaffe aircraft which threatened the Allied land forces. In common with the Allies' other tactical warplanes, the Mustangs were linked by radio with controllers operating with the forward ground troops. This meant that Mustangs patrolling above the front at medium altitude could be called down without delay to intervene in the land battle by destroying German troops, tanks, artillery, and strong points, thereby blasting the way open for the soldiers. The Mustang pilots also kept a constant eye open for targets of opportunity on the ground. The Germans sought to move by night, but the overall situation was so dangerous that they had sometimes to move trains and road convoys by day. The Mustang pilots eagerly pounced on these. The men of the 8th and 9th Air Force's fighter squadrons inevitably kept their eyes open for the occasional German warplane that might provide an air-to-air victory. The Luftwaffe still possessed effective fighters and also a number of pilots who were both experienced and skilled. But the Mustang pilots were also experienced and competent, and were flying a superb fighter at the peak of its development. The Mustang squadrons were also so superior in numbers that they could swamp the limited air units which the Germans managed to get into the air. The most successful Mustang ace and 6th on the all-time U.S. ace list was Major George E. Preddy of the 352nd Fighter Group. Preddy had started his fighter career in the Southwest Pacific, but following hospitalization as a result of a collision with another P-40, was transferred to Europe. Here he quickly found his feet in the Mustang and soon achieved a score of 26.83 air-to-air victories, together with 5 aircraft destroyed on the ground. On the 6th of August 1944, Preddy claimed 6 kills in a single sortie. Just over 4 months later, on Christmas Day, Preddy was killed in the crash of his Mustang after it had been hit by the fire of a U.S. anti-aircraft battery that was trying to engage the German fighters that Preddy and 2 other Mustang pilots were chasing. With the U.S. 12th and British 21st Army groups driving the German armies eastward through northern France and back toward Belgium and western Germany, the Mustangs continued their roving commission ahead of the ground forces. No ground target of even limited importance to the Germans was safe from their attentions. Aimed with the aid of Bell & Howell Type N9 reflector gun sight, or in late production aircraft Type K-14 gyro gun sight, the P-51D's gun armament of 6 50 caliber Browning MG-53-2 machine guns had 400 rounds per gun for the 2 inboard weapons and 270 rounds per gun for the 4 outboard weapons. These did not pack the punch of the 20mm and occasional 30mm cannon of German fighters, but fired a mix of ammunition types including armor-piercing incendiary. This was spectacularly successful in attacks on locomotives and rolling stock, and was also effective against lightly armored targets such as self-propelled flak guns. In France, Paris was liberated between the 19th and 25th of August 1944. and there seemed to be nothing the Germans could do to check the speed of the Allied advance to the east. The capability of the Allied tactical aircraft was everywhere attested by columns of shattered German vehicles, lining many of the roads along which Allied troop convoys and armored units advanced. The 354th Fighter Group was known as the Pioneer Mustang Group, as it was the first to receive the P51B. Established on the west coast of the USA in November 1942 and reaching England in November 1943 to become part of the 9th Air Force, the group was the first to use the Mustang in the escort role during December of the same year. On the 11th of January 1944, Colonel James Howard was flying with a flight of the group's 356th Fighter Squadron on a B-17 escort when the flight detached to attack approaching German fighters. Howard alone remained to protect the bombers, which were then attacked by 30 German fighters. In the furious engagement which followed, Howard shot down 3 of the attackers and drove off the rest after exhausting all his ammunition. For this action, Howard became the only fighter pilot in the European theater to be awarded the Medal of Honor in World War II. As part of the 19th Tactical Air Command, the 354th Fighter Group cooperated closely with Lieutenant General George S. Patton's U.S. Third Army as it drove across France, through western Germany, and into western Czechoslovakia in the last 10 months of the war. The 354th Fighter Group ended the war with 701 air combat victories, the second highest scoring group being the 56th Fighter Group with 677 aerial victories. Just as important as the group's air combat victories were its less quantifiable but nonetheless major successes in the ground attack role. In this task, the decimation of German aircraft on the ground was important, but so too were the destruction of rail transport and road convoys, being used to move men and weapons to the front or from one part of the front to another. Even when locomotives, rolling stock, and road vehicles were not completely destroyed, they were often badly damaged, and the attack seriously dislocated German efforts to make the best possible use of their dwindling numbers of men and very limited quantities of fuel. Everywhere in Northern Europe, with the continuing decimation of the Luftwaffe, the Mustangs harried and destroyed the retreating German ground forces. As the Allied armies closed up to the Rhine and other water barriers during their advance into Germany, they knew that Mustangs and other tactical warplanes were always on hand to shred German strongpoints that were checking the progress of the land forces. By the autumn of 1944, the operations of the German Air Force were severely hampered by fuel shortages and the poor quality of the new fighter pilots reaching frontline units. The Germans still had good fighters, such as the Bf-109G and FW-190A, and pilots who flew with courage, if not in general the skill, of their predecessors. The Germans were also seriously outnumbered, and the Mustangs took a heavy toll. As the Allied armies crossed into Germany, they encountered increasing resistance and were also confronted with the need for more urban fighting. Armored and artillery support was literally vital in such circumstances, but so too was the overhead umbrella of fighter bombers. From this, Mustangs could be called down by radio-equipped controllers on the ground to destroy pinpoint targets with bombs or shatter groups of infantry with machine gun fire. The Mustang was also used in the Pacific Theater. Here, the P51D was supplemented by the lightened P51H, of which 555 were delivered for service in the bomber escort role. Also in service was the F-6D, the armed reconnaissance variant of the P-51D. On the 11th of January 1945, Major William A. Shomo of the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron took off from Mindoro Island. He and his wingman were tasked with reconnoitering northern Luzon in support of the U.S. 6th Army's invasion of the Philippines. Flying above the Cagayan River, they encountered a Japanese bomber protected by 12 fighters. Shomo immediately attacked the formation and shot down the leading Japanese aircraft, which exploded in flames. He then maneuvered onto the side of the formation and shot down another fighter, before attacking from the other flank and scoring yet another hit. Shomo then engaged the bomber, which crashed, and before he was finished, downed another 3 fighters.
As they came in over Mindoro Strip, the lead pilot, Captain Arthur Shomo, executed a victory roll, indicating that he had destroyed an enemy plane. Ground crews looked up, surprised. But Shomo had only begun. He went around again, did another victory roll, and the men on the ground started counting. 2 planes down. When Captain Shomo executed his 3rd and 4th victory roll, it brought out the brass. By the time he was making the 5th, the 6th, and 7th roll, no one would believe it. 7 victories seemed impossible. He was just showing off. No, Captain Shomo did not show off. On 7 April 1945, he was awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. The citation read in part,
Major Shomo's extraordinary intrepidity in destroying 7 aircraft in one action is unparalleled in the Southwest Pacific area.
The main weight of the strategic bombing of Japan was borne by the Boeing B-29 Super Fortress heavy bombers of the 20th Air Force's 20th and 21st Bomber Commands from bases in the captured Mariana Islands. Initially operating at high altitude by day with high explosive bombs, And later at low altitudes by night with a mix of explosive bombs and incendiaries, the superfortresses blasted and burned the heart out of Japan's war industries, transportation networks, and cities. The bombers did not suffer unduly heavy losses to Japanese anti-aircraft fire and fighter attacks. Even so, some bombers were shot down, while others suffered damage to their structures or essential systems, and casualties among the members of their crews. Damaged bombers and wounded crew members were of constant concern to the commanders and planners of the 20th Army Air Force, for it was a long haul back to the Marianas for damaged aircraft and wounded Americans. The flight back to the Marianas had to be made over the frequently inhospitable Pacific Ocean, often in the face of strongly adverse winds, and here there was always the threat of having to ditch in friendless waters. The very length of the sorties to and from Japan also meant that some technical failures were inevitable. The most dangerous of these were engine problems, which again raised the specter of ditching far from land. And yet, time and time again, the B-29 super fortresses continued to fly their unescorted missions and to deliver an increasing tonnage of bombs which was to burn the heart out of Japan. What was needed was a base from which escort fighters could be launched, and at which badly damaged B-29s could land in an emergency. Here, the small island of Iwo Jima, lying between Japan and the Marianas, proved a useful asset after it had been taken in a month of fighting during February and March 1945. The fighting for this small island of black volcanic sand was bitter in the extreme. But the U.S. Marines' success allowed airfields on the islands to be used by damaged bombers returning from missions over Japan. The airfields also hosted Mustang fighter squadrons, which could then range to and from Japan as escorts for the bombers. The Mustangs and their experienced pilots were far superior to their Japanese opponents, and effectively ended the air threat to the bombers. With the threat of Japanese air interception of the B-29 bombers all but eliminated, the Mustang pilots could start to fly their fighters not so much as escorts, optimized for the air-to-air task, but in the tactical fighter role. This was a role the Mustang pilots had perfected over Europe against the Germans, and their experience was now translated very effectively to the Pacific theater. Even at the ranges dictated by the great size of the theater, the Mustang had the ability to carry a full ammunition load and a considerable weight of bombs or rockets for extended loiters over the Japanese home islands. In the face of an air opposition that had plummeted in numbers and capability, the Mustangs could now swoop down to low altitude to drop bombs or napalm tanks, fire rockets, and use their machine guns to strafe all types of small targets. These last included parked aircraft, locomotives and rolling stock, bridges and tunnels, military dumps, smaller industrial facilities, and coastal shipping and fishing vessels. These attacks could not inflict the level of damage that the heavy bombers regularly achieve, but did pick off individual targets that were unsuitable for heavy bomber attack by night. Flown by day, the Mustang attacks also helped to keep the Japanese off balance, as they tried desperately to prepare themselves for the invasion they knew must happen. later in 1945 or early in 1946. Despite being an excellent warplane, the Mustang was not perfect, and nor were its pilots. Many aircraft were lost in the air, and others in takeoff and landing accidents. In the latter case, maintenance personnel were on hand to salvage everything they could, and so keep other Mustangs serviceable and thus a threat to the enemy, whether German or Japanese. Production of the P-51 totaled 16,766 aircraft, and many of these survived the war for continued service with the USA and a number of Allied countries. The final expression of the Mustang's concept as an escort fighter was the twin Mustang, which was just too late for service in World War II. The type served after the war in limited numbers as the F-82 and was basically two examples of the late-war P-51H, a development of the P-51D with more powerful engines and a lightened structure, connected by a new wing center section and tailplane. The result was a two-seat escort and fighter bomber with a range in the order of 2,350 miles, and the armament of 650 caliber machine guns and up to 4,000 pounds of bombs or 25 5-inch rockets. The P-51 was truly a war-winning fighter, and was so successful that the type remained in service with some U.S. allies into the mid-1980s. There are still a comparatively large number of P-51s in existence. Some of these are museum exhibits, but a surprisingly large number are airworthy, either as warbirds or as adapted racing aircraft. Other examples of the Mustang are also being reconstructed, with a view to their return to the air, which the supremely elegant Mustang still graces as few other aircraft have done.